This is the Milky Way, and I'm going to show you how we can take photos like this. First, we will be talking about the right conditions, what time to shoot, what gear to use, and how to set up your camera. Then I'll also show you how I edit a Milky Way shot like this with a bit of Lightroom and Photoshop. Basically, it's pretty easy. Set up your camera on a tripod, connect to a remote, and let it shoot for a few hours while you enjoy a cold beer. Of course, this has to be done during nighttime. But it not only needs to be night. The Milky Way is visible the best from midnight to around 5 AM. During these hours, the Milky Way is at its highest above the horizon, and the galactic core is nicely visible. It's also worth to remember the Milky Way rises in the southeast, crosses the southern horizon, and sets in the southwest. That's important to know when looking for locations. Plus, depending on where you live, the time of the year plays a huge role as well. For me in southern Germany, Milky Way season lasts from sometime around May to September, but the further north you live, the shorter the Milky Way season will be. Of course, to see it in the first place, we want to have a clear sky without clouds. But some clouds at the right position can make your composition interesting. Unfortunately, due to heavy light pollution around anything even remotely close to any kind of settlement, chances are we can't properly see it from our backyard. That means a dark location is the one most important factor to see the Milky Way in all its glory. So the first thing we need to do is to find the darkest place near us. Darksitefinder.com is a great and easy to use tool to find such locations. As you can see, if you're living in Europe, you might have to drive a little longer to get to the next dark place, since the light pollution here is just nuts. Fortunately for me, it's just a 2-hour drive and a little hike up the mountain to get to a great spot. We're setting up a camp here because, as I mentioned, the best time to shoot the Milky Way is between midnight and 5 AM. This way, having this camp, after setting up the camera, I can let the camera do all the work while I'm sleeping, and I don't have to wait for hours in the cold. So if you plan on shooting the Milky Way, you want to find a dark spot on a clear night between midnight and 5 AM during Milky Way season. Plus, make sure there is no moon up in the sky, because the moonlight will eat up other stars just like human-made light pollution, and the Milky Way will be less visible. Gear-wise, you need 4 things: a camera, a wide-angle lens, a tripod, and a remote. A full-frame camera allows you to use higher ISO values with less noise being introduced. Higher ISO means we will get more light on the sensor, and thus the image will be brighter and the Milky Way more visible. It also gives us some more flexibility with the other camera settings. There are other benefits of using a full-frame system, like a wider field of view or a higher dynamic range. But of course, you can also shoot the Milky Way with a smaller camera, so please don't be discouraged by that. Another big factor in getting stunning Milky Way images is the lens, obviously. In general, a wide-angle lens is needed to capture the size of the Milky Way, ideally coupled with an amazing foreground. Something between 16 and 24 mm is a great starting point. This doesn't mean longer lenses are useless. In fact, those are used to create photos focusing more on the Milky Way core, but that's a topic for a different video. With this video, I want to focus on those wide Milky Way scenes. Very important is the aperture of the lens you're using. The bigger the aperture, the better. f2.8 is a popular choice by many photographers, but if your lens allows it, you can of course go with even bigger apertures, which in turn means we are again getting more light on the sensor. Keep in mind, opening up the aperture all the way might result in lower image quality, especially towards the edges, so you always want to check that for image quality. All of that being said, the best lens to shoot with is the one you have with you. I shot that sequence with an aperture of f4 because currently I don't have a wide-angle lens with a bigger aperture. That just means I need to compensate with higher ISO, although this will cost image quality. Now here are a few popular lens choices when it comes to Milky Way photography. To capture these kind of images, you don't need a special tripod, although of course there are tools to drag stars and get higher quality photos. But to start this, just make sure to use a sturdy tripod and make sure to set it up well so it doesn't tip over in windy conditions. Finally, the remote controller. A remote control makes things a lot easier, since you just set up the timer and let it shoot all night long. This way we can look for the best image afterwards and don't have to be with the camera all the time. Plus, as a bonus, we can create cool time-lapse videos like this. If you don't have one, that's not that bad. You can still trigger the camera manually, but it will get exhausting pretty fast, of course. Now, those 4 items are pretty much the basic setup. Of course, there are many more tools to get better image quality, like modified cameras, star tracker, lens heaters, filters and so on. But to get started, you don't need those things. You want to get as much light on the sensor as possible without introducing noise levels that are not fixable. Most importantly, we want to shoot in manual mode, so we get all the control over the following settings. We already talked about the impact of aperture. Something like f2.8 is good, and you can experiment with even bigger apertures if your lens allows it. Just make sure to check image quality. To further boost the light hitting the sensor, we can adjust ISO. The time-lapse I showed a few times throughout this video was shot at ISO 12,800, which is quite high. There's a ton of noise in the image. I used such a high ISO because I only was able to use an aperture of f4, so I willingly introduced more noise by raising the ISO, but I also got more light on the sensor. We can kind of fix such noise levels with editing, which I'm showing you in a minute. But I personally would prefer to shoot with lower ISOs, somewhere around maybe 6400 or ideally 3200. Now you might be wondering why I don't just use longer shutter speeds. As the Earth is rotating, the stars move across the sky, and combining that with longer shutter speeds will result in star trailing. This can be a wanted effect in photos like this, but we are aiming for a sharp, clear Milky Way image. So we want to prevent star trailing at any cost. How can we figure out how long we can expose before star trails appear? That's pretty simple. Let's assume we are shooting on a full frame camera. Now take 500 divided by the focal length you're using and you will get the perfect shutter speed. So 500 divided by 16mm equals 31.25. Rounded down, that would be around 30 seconds. I like to be extra safe, that's why I shot this with a 20-second exposure. Now if you're shooting on a crop camera, instead of 500, take 300 and divide it by the desired focal length to find out the shutter speed. So to summarize, a great starting point would be an aperture of f2.8, ISO between 3200 and 6400, a shutter speed of around 20 to 30 seconds using a 60mm wide-angle lens. One thing that's a bit more challenging is getting the focus right. At night, seeing things on the camera display is pretty much impossible, except for bright lights. So what we want to do is to look for the brightest star in the sky. Then we are pointing our camera towards it and start looking for that one bright star on the camera display. Once you found it, zoom in on it and now you can set up a perfect focus. You might think you can just put the focus on infinity, but the chances are this won't work. So it's better to spend a few extra minutes to get the focus right. And now that we got our image, of course we also want to edit it. So let's do that in Lightroom. So now that we have our RAW file, how can we edit it? This was shot at ISO 12,800 and you can already see a lot of noise in the image. That's especially a problem in the dark areas of the foreground, but also a little bit in the sky. I want to get rid of the noise, and there are two ways of doing that. First, of course, you want to head into the Details tab, and now we can decide between AI denoise or we can do the manual noise reduction. Manual noise reduction will not get us as good results as the AI denoise. The problem with using AI, we will probably introduce some weird looking stars in the sky. So that is really up to you. I can show you an image where I used the manual noise reduction. This is looking something like this. You can see the image looks a little softer. We still have some noise in the image, but we didn't alter the stars in a weird way. This was how I edited the image for the time-lapse sequence. For a still frame, I want to use AI denoise because I just want to push the edit a little further. So let's click on denoise. Right away in the enhanced preview, you can see how this will nicely get rid of all that ugly color noise. However, you can also see it does kind of add some weird things, like these stars, which are very, very subtle in the background. That's the downside of using AI denoise for Milky Way images like this. It's really up to you if you want to use it or not. For me, that's not a big deal, so I'm just going to use it. However, I want to bring down the amount of denoise, so this effect is less of a problem. So let's go with something like that. Looks pretty good, so let's click Enhance. Immediately the image looks much better and we can start with the basic adjustments. So let's head out of the Details tab and open up the basic panel. I'm going to change the profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Standard just to make the base image a little brighter. Let's work on the tonal adjustments. Overall this image is rather dark, so I'm going to bring up the exposure, making everything slightly brighter. I'm also going to bring up the highlights quite a bit, which will mainly affect the sky since there are the most highlights. And I do want to bring up the whites for the same effect. Alright, and by just these three adjustments, you can see the Milky Way sky already looks much better. Let me show you the comparison to before and after, and you can instantly see the difference. Now we can also target the shadows and the blacks and making them a little brighter, so we can also see some things in the foreground. So I'm going to raise the shadows a little more, and let's raise the blacks. This will not only affect the darker parts in the foreground, but will also make the sky brighter. And doing this, the Milky Way core right here might get a little less visible, so you want to pay close attention to that. Small side note, the AI denoise also did some funny things to the foreground, but I don't think someone will notice. Alright, we are pretty much done with the tonal adjustments. What I want to do next is to adjust the white balance. And what you can do for Milky Way seeds like this, if you don't know what to do, is you can set the white balance to auto. This is looking pretty good so far. I do, however, want to make it slightly warmer. And maybe bring down the tint just a little bit, because we do have a bit too much magenta in the sky. So right around here looks good to me. Okay. I do want to add a bit of texture, giving the image more sharpness. And I want to reduce clarity, and I want to reduce the dehaze. Reducing clarity and dehaze will just give the image a softer look, which works quite nice in this case, but again, that's totally up to you. I'm also going to bring up the vibrance quite a bit so we can see some more colors in this image right around here. Perfect. Again, let me show you the before and after comparison, and you can see using just a bunch of basic adjustments, the image looks much better with much more detail. However, the Milky Way core might lost some attention, so we want to fix that using a bit of masking. So let's open up the masking panel. First off, I want to use a linear gradient covering the top part of the sky like this. And what I want to do is to add contrast, quite a lot of it, just to make the top parts darker without making the stars darker. Wonderful. We could even bring down the blacks for the same effect. So somewhere like this. And if you want, we can introduce some more coldness by slightly bringing down the temperature. All right. Then I'm going to use a radial gradient and just roughly cover that Milky Way core in the center. something like this. What I want to do to make the core a little more visible and thus get some more attention on it is I'm going to bring down the contrast. This will make the area brighter. And I'm going to increase the clarity to add more structure to this particular spot. So just like that, I can deactivate this mask so you can see the difference from before to after. It helps a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to overdo it. We could maybe also increase the exposure slightly just to make it some more visible, but we really don't want to overdo it. Then let me create another radial gradient for that spot right here above the mountains, because I want to add some glowing bright spot just above these mountains on the horizon. And I'm doing this by increasing the whites. Let's increase them a lot. And I'm also going to increase the blacks. Okay, that looks great. Maybe we could even bring down the dehaze a little bit, but that's about it. Also, that's it for the masking adjustments. So let me show you the image with the basic adjustments applied. And here we have it with the masking added on top. And you can see how the Milky Way core now stands out a little more. Okay, now on to a little bit of color grading. I'm going to start in the color mixer and I want to work on the saturation. Looking at the sky, you can see some green shimmering through, and I really don't like that. So I'm going to bring down the green saturation, and this way we're just getting a clearer sky. Perfect. I'm not going to touch the split toning. I don't think it's needed for this image. What I want to do is to head into the calibration tab. Here, I want to play around with these sliders. In this case, I'm going to bring down the blue primary hue quite a bit. This will shift the colors dramatically, but I like this effect. You can see the sky is getting a stronger orange-red tint, which I think looks great. I'm also going to bring up the blue saturation so the colors really start to pop. Then let's see. I'm going to bring up the green saturation and the red saturation as well, just because I love having a colorful image like this. Okay, I also want to head into the lens corrections real quick and check remove chromatic aberration just to be safe. And at this point we can apply some sharpening. So not sure if it's really needed, but let's apply it anyway. I'm going to bring down the radius. I'm going to increase the details. I'm going to add masking while holding down the Alt key. So we are able to see where the sharpening is being applied. I think something like this looks great with some of these stars getting somewhat sharper. So I'm going to add just a little bit of sharpening here. And that's it. This is our image after the Lightroom adjustments. Let me once more show you the before and after comparison. You can see we have a completely different image that looks much better. Milky Way images are usually a little more complex to edit, and I want to continue working on it with a bit of Photoshop. So let's right click on the image, go to Edit In and choose Edit in Photoshop. Let me duplicate the base layer first real quick by pressing Ctrl J, so we do have a backup. Now there are many advanced techniques when it comes to Milky Way editing. And of course that would be way too much for this video, but I want to show you one thing which is called star reduction. There are also paid plugins which will do this automatically for you, but I want to show you a way of manually doing that. So with our layer selected right here, I'm going to zoom in the image a little bit. And what I want to do is now let's head into the select menu and choose color range. Here, pick up the eyedropper and let's click right in one of these bright stars. We can add another color maybe, and let's go with this. Okay, that looks great. And we can use the fuzziness slider to select more or less of the image. So we can bring it up a bit and there are some more parts selected. So I think I'm quite happy with this selection. Let's hit OK. At this point you can see the marching ants selection, and what we want to do is we want to modify it a little further. So head up to the select menu, go to modify and choose feather. Here I'm choosing a feather radius of 1 pixel and let's hit OK. Then we want to head up into the filter menu, go to other and choose minimum. Here you want to make sure in the preserve drop-down menu you choose roundness. And then set the radius to 0.4. Actually, let's go with 0.5, like that, and hit OK. Now hit Ctrl D to deselect the image. And now you will notice a few things. You can see we do have less stars in the sky, especially in this area right here. This will make the fog of the Milky Way core more visible, and overall it will make these bright stars less overexposed. So I can deactivate this layer once to show you the difference from before to after. If you want, you could apply a layer mask, and I'm going to set the foreground color to black. And let's bring down the brush opacity a bit. Now I'm going to paint back in some of these stars in the Milky Way core. Let me deactivate the layer mask so you can see the difference. And that's quite big. What else can we do? We can bring back the brush opacity to 100%. And now we're looking for the bigger stars and just paint over them. This will add some kind of glowing effect on these bigger stars and just give the image some more extra punch. I think this looks great. I'm just randomly targeting those brighter stars. Okay, but we can do some more things. Let's create a new layer, set the blending mode to hard light, and we can enhance that glow even more. Again, we're using the brush, but bring down the brush opacity once more to around 10%. Now let's zoom in here, and I'm going to pick up a color from that bright star. And now I'm just painting over it once to add this glow effect. Just make sure to use a soft brush, otherwise this looks very strange. Again, I'm just choosing stars randomly, and we can also pick another color like this and paint over this star. Alright, that looks great. Again, let me show you the difference before, after. Much better. Then let me merge everything by hitting Ctrl Shift Alt E. And I want to get rid of that plane flying through the image. I'm just using the Spot Healing Brush tool. And hopefully this won't look weird, but it works quite nice. Okay, perfect. We can further boost the Milky Way core. For this, let me create a new layer and set the blending mode to overlay. Now we want to select the highlights of the image. We can do that by hitting Ctrl Alt 2. And with that selection, go to our new overlay layer and hit the layer mask icon. This way we are creating a luminance mask. And on that overlay layer, again, use the brush, set the foreground color to white. Again, make sure the brush opacity is set rather low. And now I'm just going to carefully paint over the Milky Way core a little bit to make it more visible. I'm also going to paint on the horizon just to have some more glow up in here. That is looking awesome. Another thing we could add would be a little bit of autumn glow. So once more, merge everything, hitting Ctrl Shift Alt E. And let's go to Filter, Blur, and choose Gaussian Blur. Let's bring up the radius a little more and hit OK. Go to Edit, choose Fade Gaussian Blur, and set the blending mode to lighten and bring down the opacity here. Alright, I think opacity of around 20% looks fine. Let's hit OK, and there we have the autumn glow effect. Finally, I do think the whole image could be a bit brighter, so I'm going to use an adjustment layer here and choose brightness and contrast. Here, let's simply raise the brightness a bit. Okay, maybe even the contrast some more, but that's looking great. Much better, and I think we are done editing this image. So I hope I was able to teach you a few things about Milky Way photography, and I hope you will enjoy your next trip capturing the Milky Way. If you have any questions about the whole process, maybe editing, setting up your camera or anything else, let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching this video.